Dipna from the Mayo Genealogy Group, and I'd like to welcome you back to the third session of our Mayo Roots series, where we'll answer some of the questions that we haven't answered before. I'd like to thank Mayo.ie for offering us this opportunity to share our experiences in ancestry with you all, and I'd also like to thank Mick from visit Castlebar.ie as well. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Laura Colleran and Noreen Maher from Ireland Reaching Out, and hopefully we can answer some of the questions you have given us. So maybe I'll just go on to one thing that I actually left out of the videos, but I'd like people to be aware of, and that's really about, say, the conquest of Ireland, the kingdoms, and how Ireland was divided, which is important when you're searching for an ancestor. So with the conquest came the baronies, because you can imagine nobility and being given maybe called a baron of something or a baroness of something. So first of all, Ireland is divided into provinces. So you've got your 4 provinces, then you've got your baronies, and your baronies then are divided into counties. So in the case of Connacht, where Mayo is in, there are 5 different counties in there. And there's different types of parishes. There are civil parishes, which would be the newer type, and there are the parishes that are associated with the churches. Now, they can be quite difficult when you're doing research, because parish may go from one townland to another townland according to the churches. But then when the famine struck and the poor law unions set up, it was like the birth of our present day councils and our present day unions. They divided into 9 here in Mayo, and there was a workhouse built in each one to help the people in each one, but that became the civil register. So after that date, when you're looking for somebody, you will be looking in, say, Swinford, Westport, the larger towns of Mayo, where the workhouses originated. And this is where you would search. These are on the Irish Genealogy.ie website. So that's very important when you're researching. And just one other thing I'd like to mention is in 1898, there were more changes. And sometimes they have a dispute where Balladreen, is it in Mayo, is it in Roscommon? And this is where this originated. It was through the landlords. When they took the land off the landlords, they distributed it into the towns. So if you're researching people in Ballina before 1898, north of the river, which is Ardnaree now, would have been in Sligo. So it's awful important when you can find your ancestors. The same as some townlands up around Galway, say Cong, the Neil, they were regarded as in Galway, but now they're in Mayo. So just that might help you find your ancestors.
So I'm delighted that we're joined also by Noreen Maher. So she's joining us on Zoom from Dublin. She's a volunteer with Ireland Reaching Out, and she has been giving a lot of valuable advice to people all over the world through our irelandexo.com message board. So I'll let Noreen maybe tell you a bit more about herself and volunteering for Ireland Reaching Out.
Okay, I've been involved with Ireland Reaching Out since about 2013 probably. Around the time of the gathering actually is when I started getting involved. And then I come from a parish in Tipperary, and it's noted, it's called Ballingarry, but it's in the barony of Slivarda, which is very important because there's a few Ballingarries, so that's why baronies can be important. And it's the area where the 1848 Young Irelanders uprising took place. So it has that historic connection. And I've got very close connections with a lot of people who are local and would have a lot of historical input, and are very interested in the history of the area in general. And it's also a coal mining area, and so it would have a high percentage of immigration to areas like Pennsylvania, to say Scranton. So there's a lot of connections, and with people in the US, for instance, who would have emigrated. So I work on the message boards, any information that comes in or questions that come in, And if it's something that I'm not an expert in, I have my network in my parish who might be, somebody who knows a lot more about the history, or if somebody is coming to visit the area, then I would put them in touch with somebody who would meet them and maybe show them where the old homestead was, or arrange for them to go to the church. If it's locked up or whatever, they might arrange for it to be opened up. So it's a network rather than just one individual, but I would be the liaison, the point of contact for anybody who was asking about Ballingarry. So I think that's generally how the system works in other parishes as well. So it's a great little network, and you have local knowledge, and that's the important thing, because whereas people might be looking at records on databases, but when it comes down to the local level, they need somebody on the ground who can actually point out the building or the graveyard or whatever to them. So that's where it's invaluable as a resource for people.
And I think the network is really important. Like you said, you might have a small piece of information, but it's when you add that to the collective information that's out there that really helps break down some walls. And as I was saying to you earlier, Dimna, a lot of the diaspora have ancestors in different counties. In Mayo or Galway, a lot have ancestors from both Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. So having that network and being able to connect in with different researchers and volunteers in different parishes and counties, that's really, really important to helping people then connect locally.
And what Noreen mentioned there is the really important thing, and the reason we're all here really is the local knowledge, because no matter what you'll find online, you won't find that local knowledge. That knowledge that the elder men in the village may have, or the local parish priest may have. So that's a really important point. So feel free when you do visit Ireland to drive into your village and ask people questions as well. Can I just ask Noreen one of the questions that somebody has sent in to us. Michael has asked us. His question is, I am eager to track my Mayo roots as far back as possible. Noreen, would you be able to answer about what records are available and how far they can go back online?
Again, it depends on the parish that he's from, because as you know, there's a lot of different parish registers held locally, and some may go back earlier, than others, and you really need to know which parish your ancestor came from. And there's a lot of resources that can help you with that. But again, local knowledge, you can't beat that really. If you can go to the village or the area, often looking at where people are buried can be a great help as well, because sometimes records don't go back far enough in the area, but you might find a gravestone that gives you a guide to the period of time that they lived or died in. So that's useful to know. Local knowledge in maybe local libraries are great as well as the online sources. So it depends on the period of time that he's looking at, but you mightn't always go back, as far as you'd like to go back. But sometimes you have to settle for, the records that are available, and maybe look at social history, look at what was happening in the village or the period of time, or, if there was during the famine, or if there was like the Young Irelanders Rising where I come from, so you can find out about the history of what life was like when your ancestor was living there. So, there's a lot of ways you can trace your ancestry without actually having, physical documents, because sometimes you might never get a document, because you have to bear in mind the period of time that you're covering.
And I have also found the John Graham's website. It's called Irish Ancestors, where he shows a map of Ireland, and it shows the concentration of a surname in that area, so you can find where your surname was most common. It gives you a bit of a start. So we have another question from somebody. Why can't I find my ancestor's death or marriage online? And there could be reasons for this, because if a spouse has died, the wife or the husband may go to live with relatives, so check out who the relatives are, or they may have deceased in a neighbouring townland. Weddings, it was usually in the bride's townland, so they could search that, try and find out where the bride came from. And the other thing is, the death could also have occurred in a hospital, a nearby hospital, not necessarily the town that the person came from.
And what do you think, Dimpna, about newspaper archives? Because again, as Noreen was saying, information can be found in many different areas, and perhaps not in the strict genealogical sense that we think of births and baptisms. I know a lot of the Irish newspapers and Mayo newspapers, I think that they are online now, and they can be researched, can't they?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on your budget when you're starting off. There's a lot of information you can get online, but you have to pay for. So you should always look at what's available for free first. Look at the sites like irishgenealogy.ie if it's more recent after 1864. Then look at the National Library, which has the parish registers. Now, again, it's not as easy to find, but if you have the time, you can. So there's a lot of things like that. But then, for newspapers, there are websites, but you have to pay to access them. There are some sites that you can access if you're looking, say, at American records or obituaries. There are some newspapers that you can access online, but you really need to identify where you're looking first, and sometimes get as much information as possible, and then if you have to pay for it, have a list of places or people you're looking for, so you can, if you're taking out a month's subscription or something, then that you make the most use of the site and get the value out of it, rather than spending time searching around and going back and forth to it. So have a plan. That's the main thing. So there's different sites though.
My experience of newspapers are, I actually have a subscription to newspaper at all times, because I actually find them a wonderful source of research. And what I do is, and if you look out for this, times like Christmas, times like anniversaries, St. Paddy's Day, there will be great offers on the newspaper websites. And when you find somebody, say an obituary, you will find all the relationships that that person has had. Even some things like sons-in-laws, daughters-in-laws, you will find the people that send telegrams, send letters. So the old obituaries are worthwhile. But you mentioned the States as well. There's a very good website, it's called Chronicling America. And it's got everything's free on that website, and you will get Irish records on it because they reprint it. If somebody died in Ireland, you will see on them American copies, please copy. So as well as that, there's a very good one for Australia, and that's called Trove.
Excellent.
An excellent one. So if you look, but watch out for the special offers and the papers, because they are they have a lot of information. They have a lot of information about events in a village, so like cattle runs that happened as well. And it will mention everyone in the village because they were all arrested at the time. So it's worthwhile if you can pinpoint where your ancestors are from. The library also, if you're a member of your local library, will allow you to search the newspapers free. So maybe I'll ask Noreen this question. Where can you search church parish records? If you could just tell a little bit about the NLI site, your experience of it.
Okay. Well, it depends on obviously whether they're Roman Catholic church records you're looking for, or whether it's Church of Ireland you're looking for. And as the majority of the Irish would have been Catholic, that's the one that's most often used or most often looked for. Now there are a lot of different sites, again, free and with subscriptions. One, for instance, that you do have to pay for, but you have an index that you can use first, is Roots Ireland, which is the umbrella organisation of all the local county genealogy centres. So with that, you just register on the site, and you can do initial searches that might help narrow down some areas for you. And then when you decide, you can make a subscription payment. But with the National Library of Ireland, they have got a lot of the parish registers now digitised on their site, and it's registers.nli.ie. Now the only thing is, it's not as searchable as a lot of other database sites are. So you can put in a date, select from the list of years, the months, and whether it's baptisms or marriages or those are in the drop down selection. But again, it's a case of trawling through pages that the handwriting mightn't be the best. There might be, some of them might be in Latin again, so then you'd have to have an idea of what the original name was in Latin. So if it's James, it could be Jacob or Jacobi, whatever the format the priest used in the register. So it could take a long time going through it. But again, with the parish registers, they, especially pre 1864, before civil registration, they only recorded the bare essential information. There wasn't a set format or a form that they had to fill out. It was literally a blank page. So it depended from parish to parish how much detail was recorded and captured. So, but the main requirements were that you got either the name of the two parties if it was a marriage, and who their witnesses were, and often the priest's name was there, and maybe at the right hand side of the register you might see a townland name, which is usually where the bride came from. But, you know, some priests didn't put in even that amount of information. Depends on, you know, the circumstances. Then with baptisms, you would get the child's name and the parents' names. And, you know, in most cases, you got the mother's maiden name written on that, which would be very useful if you were trying to trace the family, the mother's side. But again, some priests just put down John and Mary O'Connor or something like that, so you mightn't necessarily get it. So it's just hit and miss really from parish to parish how much detail you get. So, you know, that's a case of scrolling through and reading through. So there's no easy way with the registers really. You know, if you have to know a certain amount before you go in. You know, you have to know the year. Otherwise you could be scrolling through a lot of pages if there's a big parish. Especially if it was a large town, you know, but there was a cathedral or something, and, you know, there could be a lot of baptisms that particular year. Another peculiar thing about the registers is you might find that a lot of marriages took place a certain month. For instance, say February or something. You think, you know, why is everybody getting married in February? But a lot of marriages took place before Lent because you couldn't celebrate as much. So you might find that a particular period of time in the year that there was a lot of weddings, and you know, so things like that you have to bear in mind. So, you know, they're a great source, and sometimes we get notes written into them about the marriages afterwards. So if the child was baptized, the priest years later, 20 years later, might have written over it, married Mary Johnson on 1918 or something like that. So, you know, sometimes you get little hints when you look at the register. There's often notes written in afterwards by the priest. So, you know, they're a little treasure really, but it's like going down a rabbit hole. You just keep going and you never know what you'll find.
Okay, so another question I have here is about learning about the social life of their ancestor. I know we were involved with the Museum of Country Life, and there's irishheritage.org, and I think there's a lot of parishes involved in that. So Lorna, we were talking just before we started about Dukas.ie. Would you like to tell?
Dukas.ie is an amazing free resource which it has digitised the work of the Folklore Commission, where children, you know, were invited, where they collected the stories of children of their grandparents. So there was the informants, and then there were the children who actually took down the stories, and all of that is available to view online. You can see a lot of it is transcribed. You can see the original documents, the stories that the children actually wrote. Just a vast amount of information about local traditions, local customs, folklore, ghost stories, and names. You know, so children will be talking about the names of their grandparents, and the stories were collected in 1937. And again, the actual website itself, Dukas.ie, is very searchable. It's very user friendly. So you can put in a name of if you, for example, believe that one of your grandparents may have been in primary school at that time, you can put in their name to see, you know, were they the taker down of the story. You can also put in the name of maybe if you make an estimation of how old a grandparent would have been in 1937, you can put in their name, and they might be they might feature in the story as the person who gave the story to the child. So you can actually find just gems. You can see, for example, your grandparents' handwriting if they were if they were the taker of the story. And again, on Ireland Reaching Out, we actually do every so often we do a piece on customs and traditions, and a lot of the information that we get is from Dukas.
I just want to mention one that I forgot, because on I think session 2 I did some of the cemeteries in Mayo, and I forgot about the IGP,
right,
which is run by a lady called Christina Hunt. Mm-hmm. And what she does is, if you don't have the time to be transcribing, like on some websites, if you take a photograph when the next time you visit a local graveyard, send your pictures to Christina. She has an army of volunteers there that will translate them. So she has a lot of Mayo cemeteries on that, some that aren't on other sources. And also, you probably have come across Christina. Can you tell what records she would have for areas you've researched, Noreen?
Well, I mean, they cover all of Ireland, really. Every county is covered by that website, igp_web.com. And every county that's there depends on the volunteers that transcribe or submit information. So sometimes you can find gems that aren't available anywhere else online, but somebody has gone to the trouble of either transcribing it or uploading it. And so it's not just graveyards, but it also has, local resources, and it's a great source definitely for any county. And the graveyards are amazing because there's a few different, I suppose, websites that do that as well. But the county, especially for Mayo, there's a huge amount of graveyards that are covered. And what I like is that the transcriptions are there, and it gives you an estimate of the original birth dates or birth years. So it helps you really. And a lot of the time when you look at, I suppose, more recent deaths in the civil registration, for instance, and you get a death certificate, but when you see the place of death, it doesn't necessarily tell you then where they're buried. And a lot of time when people are visiting an area, they actually want to visit the grave. So finding an official death record doesn't always help. So if you can find a site that has the graveyards, because I've come across people saying, if somebody died in such and such a place, where would they be buried, or where would be the nearest graveyard, or some parish, there might be 3 graveyards in the parish and one might be older than another. So people that are local might be able to say, well, look, if they died in a certain period of time, they're probably in the old graveyard or the church graveyard or whatever. And so, that's where those kind of resources are great, because you get all the list of graveyards and then you can, click into it and find the names alphabetically usually. Then there's another site, Historic Graves, which also is more, I suppose, user-friendly in the sense that you can actually scroll with a camera. You can scroll down and read and zoom in on the gravestone itself. So, sometimes they're not as legible, or the transcription that's put up on sites might miss some of the characters or some of the letters or whatever. But if you can zoom in, sometimes you can make it out clear. And, they do them very professionally so that the cameras are operated at, the right time of day for the light to shine on it. So you can really see them in very good detail. So there's a lot so graveyards are definitely worth checking out as well.
And would you say, Dimna, a lot of Mayo graveyards are transcribed?
Most of maybe some of the little old ones that people can't actually access at the moment but most of the graveyards in Mayo are transcribed, but on a number of different websites. But I forgot to mention that one last time, so I'd like to mention it. Just something else, somebody asked a question, Tim asked a question, and he just wondered how far back his family tree could go. So I thought it might be a good time to mention that if you've exhausted everything and you've exhausted all your free websites, that we do have 3 local research centres here in Mayo. That we have Ballinrobe, Southwest Mayo, so that'll be Ballinrobe, Clonmarisol, Southwest area. We have Ennisco House down in Crossmolina, and you can stay there in Ennisco House while you're researching your family. And we also have the Clube Heritage Centre back in Westport. So they will produce a lovely booklet. So it's, if you feel you've exhausted, because they do have records available that aren't searchable online. Would you find that, Noreen, you'd be able to tell all over the country?
Yeah, I'd find that, people are very enthusiastic about researching and searching online, and then, they locate different documents or whatever, but there's a gap. And that's how I got involved in genealogy myself in the first place. I started off my own, my husband's family, because my son was very young. And I thought, well, is there something out there I don't know about? How do I know I found all the websites or everything that's there? So I ended up doing a course, a diploma course that entitled me to work professionally. But again, when you look at what's available. You download documents, but then what do you do with it afterwards? And I've found people come to me for maybe an anniversary, a special anniversary, or a special birthday, like an 80th birthday or something, and they want to know how can they put that information together. So if you can get someone, either a professional genealogist or one of those genealogy centres, that will combine the information and put a kind of a narrative to it, put it in chronological order, or have a reference to at that time what was happening, to kind of put it in context. So, it's not just loads of pieces of paper with births, marriages and deaths, because they're not as meaningful. What you want to know is about your ancestor's life and the order of, the family, how many children were in it. And maybe some died very young that sometimes people didn't know about because they didn't know to look for a record. But when a genealogist looks, they might find that there was a birth, but the child died 3 months later or something. But still, they should be recorded, and they should be, noted within the family as being part of the family. So that's where a genealogist can help, because they can look into more and a broader range of sources and put it all together. And that's where it's valuable then, because then you've got something to show. And even though everything is online nowadays, nobody walks around with their laptop to visit their granny to show them. So, if you have a little booklet or, something prepared, you can hand it to them and they can spend time reading it and going through it and maybe telling you, no, that's not the right person, or I grew up in that village, or, so it's part of it. It's not, just researching online isn't the end of it. It should have something tangible.
When you do find out something about your family history, it's great to share it, because if you keep it to yourself, the information stays with you and maybe stops somebody else from making a discovery that helps them connect with their place of origin. And we have a great feature in Ireland, reaching out on Mayo.ie, and it's completely free, where you can put up a profile about your ancestor and share the information that you found out, share some photos maybe, and this is called our Ancestor Chronicles. And what we found now is that people from all over the world, we have about 140,000 members, people from all over the world now are seeing information about ancestors that they didn't know, and they're adding to the story and they're commenting. So it's a wonderful way, especially if you have commissioned research and you have found out something that was elusive, share it, and then that helps people along their own journey with their own family history. So I would invite anyone to share a profile of their ancestor on Irelandxo.com. Again, it's free and it's within your county or parish, so other people descended from the same area can find out about it.
One thing we haven't mentioned, and actually it was one of the questions that was sent into Mayo.ie, was DNA, because somebody's DNA had traced them to North Mayo. Now, I have done my DNA and I have matches mostly to my family, maybe some a little bit further afield, but I won't proclaim to know a lot of information about DNA. But it is becoming a very popular way of research, and it is linking a lot of people back to Ireland that they never were aware. So, do you want to say anything about DNA, Noreen?
Yeah, I'm the same. I suppose because I'm fortunate, I'm living in Ireland and I'm very close to my family, and I know a lot of my family didn't move around very much. They stayed on the farms and all that. So I never felt the need to do a DNA test as such. But I was actually won one in a raffle one time, and I said, I must use it because people keep asking me, what does it tell you and how useful is it? So I have to do it as an experiment, if nothing else. So I did do a test, and I got my father to do a test with a different provider. So but it should never be looked at in isolation. It's only a tool. That's definitely all it is. Just like documents are, it's a combination of, you can't replace, it doesn't replace proper research. It's just literally a tool, but sometimes it can give you a hint, or it can give you a lead that maybe you were stuck, you kind of got so far, and it can reconnect you with people as well, that maybe, like I have a personal story where I had a first cousin whose mother died very young, and we lost touch with the family, and I thought she was in England because that's where the family lived. Turns out she's in America, and she'd done a test because she was coming to Ireland to bring her children to show them where her mother came from. And then I was the only one in the family who had done a DNA test who was living in Ireland. So when she found me, I was able to open up everything to her then, met with her, showed her where her grandmother grew up, and So it's only a tool, but it's a very useful one. And it sometimes can mislead people because they think that it's going to be the be all and end all and tell them exactly where they came from. But unless somebody else in their family has done the test, they mightn't necessarily connect with somebody. So, it's not something you can just say, well, I'll do that and I'll know everything. It's only just a tool for linking you with other documents and maybe verifying something that you did know. And it may take you further back than records will exist, and you may never be able to prove your connection to that person other than seeing it on a list of fifth cousin or something, So, but it's definitely, become more popular, and it is very useful.
We get a lot of people coming to the website saying they've only just discovered that they have Irish heritage because they opened a DNA result. And funny, Noreen, we must have been in the same raffle because I also won a DNA test, which I didn't do. And somebody afterwards said to me, they were actually they were very disappointed. They gave out to me because they said, you may know, same as you, Noreen, exactly where you're from. I know where I'm from and where my ancestors are from. But if I do a test, I'm helping other people out there maybe find out more about their DNA, because then my profile will appear and it may match something in theirs that connects them back. So I thought that was very interesting that, somebody who knows all about where they're from, why would they do it? It's to help other people. And then it's helping these people who are doing a test in Buenos Aires and finding out that they are, 25% Irish, and then we can make the connection from that. So I think that's really interesting and a huge area of growth.
So Noreen, I wonder, would you be able to give us some background information on the landed estates?
Well, the Landed Estates was a project that was undertaken by National University of Ireland in Galway, and they collated a lot of information that was held by the National Library, has a lot of the estate papers of different landed gentry, and some have been restored or collected, but some have been lost, and so there's not every particular landed gentry estate available, but they focused on two areas. They focused on Connacht and Munster. And if you know the place name or the name of the big house, for instance, or whatever, or even the family that would have run this estate, you can log into the site and you can get some information. So sometimes you might even get a photograph of the original house. You might get details of who the tenants were, and the townlands that they covered. Now, some of the estates were huge. They range from like 500 acres to like whole counties nearly, depending on the size of the landowner. But some of them were small as well. And, so you got information about who the landlord was, who it passed down to. And, so often there's information like that. Now, you might necessarily get tenants' information, but if you get the estate papers itself, sometimes they do have tenants' information and maybe the rates they paid, the annual rates they paid for renting, the rental fees. And then there's other kind of another collection that's the incumbent estates, and when they were I suppose got around the time of the famine, a lot of the landowners couldn't afford to maintain the estates and had to put them up for sale. So catalogues were compiled like brochures nowadays that estate agents would use. And so those often contained a list of who the tenants were, because they're trying to sell a going concern and to say how valuable it was. So they would have details of how many tenants they had and how much arable land and the quality of the land and the rental income from it. So those kind of records are invaluable as well, but you might necessarily find your own ancestor there. But if you knew about the big estate they came from, which you might have got from Griffith's valuation, because if you look at Griffith's valuation, you'll see who the lessor was, so that would be the owner. And even just getting a picture of the type of estate that he ran can fill in gaps for you if you can't find actual records of your ancestors. So it's all part of the social history and the picture that you build up of your ancestor, and that's invaluable as well. So sometimes you're lucky, depends on what level of I suppose, the socioeconomic group you came from, whether you were one of the landlord's descendants or whether you were one of the tenants' descendants, depends on what information you might find.
It also links to the council valuation books as well, when the landlords, when the land was actually compulsory purchased of the landlords, and there was also a land act purchase, and you'll see on the council valuation boxes, you'll see LAP, so that means that they were given a grant to buy the land of the landlords, and if it says in fee on the council valuation books, it means they're actually owners of the land. A friend of mine, when she was doing her research in Dublin, she had heard of her ancestors living on a bog, and she didn't know how true this was, and this was, I think, around Kilmovee area in Mayo. But when she went back at the council valuation, they didn't actually have to pay any money because the land in the council valuation is living on bogland, no sustainable life from it. But she said they're actually living on a bog. So the council valuation books will add to your social story. You have to go to Dublin to read these. They are being put up and digitalised now, but they're not available at the moment. But they may be at some stage.
Yeah, I mean, the valuation office is great, that they allow you to access the information. You can literally hold the books that were compiled from mid 1800s to the 1970s, and again, you'll see notes, and you can see whether a house was newly built or whether it was a ruin. From looking back over the different years, you can see the kind of progression of the family, whether they survived and built bigger or whether it's now a ruin because the family have died off and they've emigrated maybe or something. So they're valuable as well, because they give you a picture of the land at the time and what was going on in Ireland. And often you see family names that changed, and that could be where somebody actually married. So it was one of the daughters that inherited the land. Often then you'd see the name change, but you find it was actually family. And if a name was no longer showing, it could be because that person died, and often there'd be notes in the side of the book that would say maybe that so and so died, or the transfer to his son, and then you knew then to look at another record maybe to see did somebody die within that period of time. So you always have to look at one beside the other. You can't look at in any record in isolation, because they all help and give clues to building a picture.
Did they use different colour inks, Nori?
Yes, yeah, they did. That's one of the drawbacks of putting them online. There is a website that has put them online, but they're only in black and white, which doesn't help, because in each book, at the front of the book, because the books might cover a few years, and so maybe 1864 to maybe 1870, and in the very front pages there's usually a color coding, and it'll tell you red and green and magenta, even words like that, they've color coded them, and so that would tell you the time period. So they'll say green might be 1864 to 1865 or something. And so when you look inside the book and you see the change of ownership crossed out in that color ink, then you know roughly what period of time that change took place. And so it's a great little clue, I suppose, as well. Now, sometimes they weren't very diligent about keeping track of it, and you might find gaps that somebody did die in between and there wasn't a note on the side. But in general, that's the process that they had to follow when they were doing the surveys.
Okay, thank you for joining in. I hope you've learned something that will help you to trace your ancestors from Mayo. I'd like to finally thank Mayo.ie for giving us this opportunity, and also Ireland Reaching Out, who have joined us here today.